This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Welcome to the AIPIS show for accredited income property investment specialists and those who aspire to be. If you're a real estate, mortgage, or financial professional, this is the place for you. We'll explore innovative investment analysis, sales, marketing, and income-generating strategies for the most historically proven wealth creator, income property. Learn from the experts as they show you how to build a better business and a better life.
It is my pleasure to welcome Jay Parsons to the show. I've been following him for a while, and I've been excited to get him on, so he is finally here, and that's exciting. He is a rental housing economist. He is a dad ×5 and suffering Cowboys fan. Talks about how rental housing is essential but misunderstood and how we need more of it. Jay, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well, Jason. Thanks for having me on.
It's good to have you. So just maybe kind of outline your thoughts on, where we've been, where we are, where you think we might be going. I would love to just hear that as a kind of a icebreaker to start things out.
Yeah, well, it's been the story of the roller coaster. I think everyone's tired of that analogy, but it's been true. Even COVID hits, everything shuts down for a few months, second half of the year, really summer of that year. Demand explodes. People are moving around again. Single-family rentals, multifamily rentals, single-family home sales. That leads up to 2021. We never saw any demand for rentals like that year. And that's really when peak rent growth was, 2021, early 2022. And then, most of last year into this year, it's been, the story of kind of slowing down. And I think now more of a story of, return to some version of normalcy. And so it's been very volatile, but I think right where we are right now is, the overall headline stats are looking kind of closer to normal. And I think that's about where we are.
So when you talk about rent growth, for many, many years, I've been counseling our clients and our audience year in and year out, try and raise your rents about 4% annually. But of course, we saw massive spikes above that the last couple of years. But, 20 years ago when I said that, it sounded pretty reasonable, right? So we're in kind of a period of moderation where rents are still growing, but just not to the crazy, crazy levels we saw before. But it is dependent on geography, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. No, it depends a lot on geography. I think, well, really, again, going back to 2020, early 22, it was kind of this rising tide boosts all ships story where, honestly, it doesn't matter what market you're in. It doesn't matter if you're the worst investor, best investor, the best property manager, the worst property manager. Everybody was seeing really strong growth. And that reflected just there was so much demand in the market. And I think now where we're at is we're seeing much more divergence. And we're seeing some places like in Phoenix and Las Vegas, Sacramento, we're seeing it's really slowed down. In some cases, even rents coming down. In other cases, it's just it's still strong, but just not quite as strong. And there's a lot of stuff in the middle. So it does vary quite a bit. And what I'll point out too is like the Midwest markets have been now all of a sudden some of the best performers because they're just very steady. And I know a lot of investors all of a sudden are getting really excited about the Midwest markets. It's kind of the steady eddies.
Yeah, we have always recommended that people invest in these sort of linear markets that are kind of boring. They don't make the headlines that much, but they're just very steady, very reliable markets that I think prudent investors do very well in.
Yeah.
So that's true. But on the multifamily side, a whole lot of new inventory has hit the market recently, hasn't it? You want to tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we've been building a lot of multifamily for the last, really since coming out of the great financial crisis. We saw strong demand for multifamily back then, as we did for SFR. And so it's been a consistent decade of building. And then COVID hits, there's this brief pause. And then again, all types of housing start to do, saw the strong demand. And so it led to this 50-year high in multifamily construction. And so that's where we are. that's going to be delivering at peak levels through this year and the first half of next year. And it's a lot of supply. And there's going to be pockets of the country where there's going to be more supply than demand in the short term. But I'll tell you what, long term, and as you introduced me earlier on, I'm a big believer that, we need more supply. And I hate the word oversupply, because in the short term, there's always periods where there's supply demand imbalance, where there could be more supply than demand to catch up in the short term. But long term, we need all this stuff. And while it could lead to some choppiness in the short term, I think long term, there's a lot of demand for the supply that's coming in.
Yeah. But in terms of the demographics coming at the rental market, I remember back in around 2010, I talked about how the demographics coming at the rental market are just phenomenal, especially given that we've got really now 2 generations with very high student loan debt where they got a mortgage. They just didn't get a house included with it, I always like to say, which is terrible, but that's another topic. And we've got this, large segment moving into their prime household formation years. And, I extended that prediction for another 10 years. I said the next 10 years are also very good like that. Am I right? Or, would you take issue with any of that?
No, I think you're right. I think the demographics are a big story of how this is played, the housing market's played out these last couple of cycles. I mean, even you're going back to the great financial crisis period, kind of building upon your point here, is even absent all of the issues that happened in single family home sales market, like you had a demographic problem, which were that, the baby boomers had already, were in homes. And then the Gen X population was the next generation of buyers, but they were half the size of the boomers. And now you look at the rental market, and I think there's good tailwinds for both SFR and for multifamily, because you have, aging millennials who are now in the single family market, whether they're buyers or renters. And then, there's some, kind of macro forces. We're seeing more renting, even though the homeownership rate continues to go up, ironically. But on the flip side, you still have, unlike the Gen Xers, millennials being followed by another large generation with Gen Z. And so, everybody in real estate is big fans of like either ors and like, this versus that. But truly, I think it's, these sectors tend to more or less ride the same waves. And I think we're in a cycle. You take out the current noise, the economy and supply, everything. I mean, the demand tailwinds are strong for all of these sectors over the next decade, I think.
Yeah. So, the only thing that really gets built in the apartment world is sort of, by definition, it's all Class A, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how do we reconcile that? I mean, are workforce people ever going to have housing, or is it all going to be from the 70s or 80s? We just can't seem to deliver affordable housing in this country.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And that's something I'm very passionate about. And anybody who follows what I post on LinkedIn and Twitter will see this topic a lot. And the short version is that it's very hard to build workforce and affordable housing in our country. And even those terms are not universally defined. There's affordable big A, which is like subsidized affordable, and there's workforce, which can mean a lot of different things. But most of what gets built today, whether it's built to rent single family or it's traditional apartments, they're being built for 6-figure income households. The typical household renting a new apartment built in the last decade is making more than $112,000 a year, with roommates. And that's not the median household, right? So the problem, though, I'll tell you, is I talk to a lot of investors and developers, and I will. Not everybody believes this, but it's the absolute truth. So many developers out there, they want to build affordable and workforce housing. The problem is that it's easier said than done. The cost of land, the cost of labor, cost of materials, all of these things have seen an inflationary run up these last few years. Everything's expensive, and you'll never meet a land seller who says, "Hey, Jason, you want to build affordable housing? Great. I'm going to cut my land price in half for you." And the builder says, "Oh, Jason, you're building affordable housing? Let me charge you half the price for lumber and concrete and steel and appliances." And the workers obviously aren't discounting you for their time and expertise either. And so really...
Well, by the way, before you go on, let me add a couple more to that. You never saw any neighbors in an area who have the NIMBY syndrome who said, "You want to build affordable housing? Sure, we need more of that. Build it right next to me." You never saw that. And you never saw a local government give you any breaks on your building codes and your restrictions and how you got to have 1,700 safety features in your house and, material specs and all this kind of stuff. So I get it that, and not to mention hurricane codes and earthquake codes and all of this stuff, but, you're just making people homeless. Like, how do we fix that?
Yeah, no, you're right. And part of there's a mismatch between like what everyone's ideals are, and this is what NIMBYism is all about, right? It's like, yeah, we need to have more affordable housing, but just not here.
Yeah, not in my backyard.
Not in my backyard. Well, that's the definition of NIMBYism. And so everyone's like, well, just build it out where it's cheaper to go. Well, people, that's not where their jobs are. That's not where their families are, their friends are. That's not where their life is. And so it's pretty horrible thing to do, especially in the cities. And so, one reason I love this topic, by the way, is it's not a left or right issue. It's like both sides actually get it really wrong. And I think this is a case what we really need is kind of a combination of public and private sector forces. And in particular, if I give a brief plug, there's two things I'm a big proponent of. One is the low-income housing tax credit, which we do have in our country. That leads to some affordable housing. There's not enough of it, and it's a lot of red tape around it. But number two, Senator Wyden of Oregon has proposed what's called the middle-income housing tax credit. And this is a really novel idea that would incentivize construction for middle-income housing and also allow for maintenance and upkeep on older apartments, but allow them to keep the rents at affordable or middle income levels, which otherwise you're having to do, gut jobs to bring these properties up to code and modern standards, and the rents are Class A rents. And so this could be a home run, but unfortunately, it's not made much progress through Congress. But there's ideas out there. We just got to get support around them.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable that you can't build. I mean, I don't know how to say this. I mean, I'm going to say it and I'm probably going to get trolled for this, but why can't you build a cheap house? I don't want to say a slum, but why can't you build a new house that's cheap, right? Yeah, I mean, there's lots of old cheap houses that we're not tearing down, right? There's lots of old slums, but it's like people are going to live in their cars, or they're going to be like quadrupled up in housing. It's just a kind of a ridiculous sort of situation we're in. It's kind of like a game of chicken, where you go first. Nobody can do it.
Yeah, it's bad. And I'll tell you, like in Los Angeles, there was an article recently said it costs about $1 million to build one affordable housing unit. And it's because what they've done is, on one side, they say, yeah, we need more affordable housing. Well, on the other side, the city has made it very onerous and expensive by numerous added requirements to build affordable housing. If you want to get these subsidies to build affordable housing, you have to do all of XYZ things that, actually make things much more expensive to build. And
right.
So, it's very unfortunate. Ultimately, at the end of the day, people suffer most are those who need housing. And I wish we could get this.
And like you alluded to earlier, Jay, the workforce housing, those people aren't able to telecommute the way white collar workers are. It's that sort of drive until you qualify concept, right? And, that's for an apartment or a house. So they're just forced to drive further and further. That's expensive. Gas is expensive. It's not good for the environment. It's just something has got to give in this whole equation. I mean, are there any examples in other countries where they're doing this right?
No, I mean, that's a good question, but the answer is not really. I think there's, a lot of in Europe, for instance, is oftentimes singled out, but, a lot of the, housing there is even more problematic. And, you see a lot of rent control policies where it's leading to corruption. Like in, one I think is really sad is like in Sweden, there's something like 5% of the entire population is on a waiting list for a rental unit. And what's happening is people get to the top of the line and then they lease out these units for, 20 times the official rent and are kind of created a black market. Now, I will single out one. It's actually in your state of Florida recently passed a bill with bipartisan support that created hundreds of millions of dollars for low and middle income housing, which, by the way, with some additional requirements, including a ban of rent control at every local level, knowing that would actually constrict supply more. And that's actually more funding for low and middle income housing than even Congress passed. And there's incremental new funding in the last Congress. So I think that's probably the best example right now.
Jay, it's funny how the human mind sort of thinks in this kind of linear way sometimes. And I've heard this so many times over the years, whether it comes to rent or buyers being able to buy houses, right? Either side. The idea that incomes aren't increasing as fast as rents are increasing or mortgage payments are increasing. So people won't be able to afford to buy or rent, and that'll crash the market. But what people just fail to understand about that is that they kind of assume it's the same buyer or renter.
Yes.
And yeah, I think you're catching right on to what I'm about to say, because what it is the standard of living just declining, where it's a person that could formerly afford more, accepting less because prices have gone up, rents or purchase prices. And people are just kind of like sadly moving down the socioeconomic ladder. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a complicated issue, but I was nodding because I think it was last year I was quoted in an article in the New York Times making that comment, which is that rents can only rise as much as incomes do, but it was sort of cut off right there, and I kind of got roasted for that. People taking my comment out of context, and really, I think in a kind of twisted sort of way to try to make a point. And the reality is is that there's natural controls on affordability that are actually for everyone's benefit, both for rentals and for home purchase. Like lenders are not loaned by giving mortgages to people who can't afford the mortgage. In the same way, property managers, whether you're mom and pop, a mid-size or institutional, they're using some sort of screening to make sure that you could afford the rent. And that barrier is typically about 30% of income on rent. And so what's happening is that as homes and rents get more expensive, it is still affordable, but only to those who are living there, right? And so we see is that there's kind of a natural filtering effect where if you look at what we see in apartment data, for instance, is incomes have gone up dramatically along with rents. And so the rent income ratio has been consistently in a low to mid 20% range. However, we also know a lot of people are not able to afford those rents anymore or not qualified because of where rents are going. Same thing with home prices. So again, the real challenge is actually not those who are living in market rate apartments or buying houses. The problem is those who are not even in the market. And that's why we've got to find ways to create more programs to allow, whether it's vouchers or tax credits or whatever, we got to find ways that increase the supply of affordable and middle income homes.
Yeah, the big trick there, though, is like even saying that incomes have been consistent with rents, right? That doesn't mean it's the same person. It doesn't mean it's the same tenant, right? I mean, we do see it get out of whack. There are exceptions because, for example, in Miami, I just recently read that rent to income ratios are like 50% now, where tenants are paying 50% of their income toward rent only. So half the month, they're working for the landlord, right? That's just crazy. Whereas normally you'd want that to be about a third, maybe 40% at the high end. But sometimes it's getting way out of whack to where it's literally half their income. But landlords will generally not exceed certain ratios, hopefully, right? So they won't let the tenant rent the house, or a lender won't lend to a buyer who wants to buy a house they can't afford, hopefully, right? It does get out of whack, as we all know. It certainly happened during the Great Recession or leading up to it. But it's not the same person, right? It's a different tenant. And that's the thing that I think it's hard to study that.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I'll say the same thing, though, about anytime you see a study saying people are spending 50% income on rent, that's not accurate, because what's happening is they're taking median income data from the government, usually, then they're taking private sector rental data, a company like ours, and they're saying, well, this does not equal that, it's 50%. Well, wait a minute, like their median income household is not living in these market rate rentals that are overwhelmingly influenced by professionally managed, more investment institutional grade homes. I mean, your average mom and pop rental in your average affordable housing unit is not actually listed online where someone's surveying that rent, including it in a rent index. And so it's apples and oranges. And so I think what you have to be able to do is you don't track incomes at the time of renewal, but you can look at two things. One, you can actually, this is what we do. I think a lot of larger property managers, you want to look, and small ones, you want to look at what's the rent income for actual households in your communities that for the time of lease signing. And then you want to look at your rent collection, people still able to pay the rent. And on a national level, and in most markets, we're still seeing rent income ratios for new leases in the low to mid 20% range. And we're seeing rent collections in the upper 90% range. And so that's for the market rate side. It's more challenging in the affordable space. And so overall, it's a good story. Again, my concern, though, is people who are not even in those numbers because they don't qualify to live in the units that are available.
And we'll be back with a lot more on this topic with this guest on our next episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.